Following a match on the National DNA Databank, a man has been charged in relation to a kidnapping and sexual assault case dating back to 1995. On March 28, 1995, approximately 5 a.m., a woman in her 50s was working in a restaurant in the 1100 block of Macleod Trail South when a man forced his way into the closed restaurant and assaulted her. He then forced the woman into her own vehicle, parked behind the store, and drove her to the outskirts of the city limits. The man sexually assaulted this woman before leaving her on the side of the road and fleeing in the woman's vehicle. The victim managed to make it to the roadway on foot, where she flagged down a passing vehicle. The passerby drove to her home and called 911. An extensive investigation took place at the time by the Sex Crimes Unit. However, officers were unable to identify the offender at that time. Calgary Police Service Sex Crimes Unit investigators continued to work on this case and finally received a match on the DNA databank, linking a male to the evidence collected back in 1995. As a result of a lengthy investigation by the cold case detectives and cooperation by the Kingston Police Force, Wayne Howard Bernard, 53, of Kingston, Ontario, was arrested today in Kingston after a short standoff with officers. He has been charged with commercial break and enter, sexual assault with a weapon, kidnapping, threats to kill, robbery, and dangerous operation of a motor vehicle.
It's been 20 years since this took place. What have police been doing to you mentioned cold case investigators. Can you just walk us through the last 20 years here?
It's advancements in DNA. The advancements in DNA are helping with these cold cases at an incredible rate. Back in 1995, it was blood typing that they were matching. They didn't have mitochondrial DNA or anything like that back at that time. So it's the advancements that are progressing our cases.
So how did this guy's name pop up on your radar? Just one day just popped up that this guy matched, or what was the circumstances behind it?
What happens is when we submit any evidence to the DNA databank and it's held there, if they have this male on the DNA databank at the same time, we'll get a hit to our unit and we'll continue investigation from that point forward. So if he's been submitted to the DNA databank and we submit some evidence that matches him, that's when we get a hit back.
So it was a recent arrest that prompted his DNA to be entered in the databank? Or?
I wouldn't say it's a recent arrest, but there was an arrest putting his DNA on the databank, and we resubmit our evidence every once in a while because of the new advances, and that's how we got the hit on this one.
When did you get that hit?
I would have to go back and confirm, but my detective's been working on this one for a couple of years.
Now, none of us can remember this, and actually some people might not have been born, but was this
I was 3.
Okay, 83. Was this a big story at the time? Was this something that people were aware of?
I wasn't in Calgary at that time, but I believe it would have been a big story because it was a stranger attack and a very violent sexual assault where she was kidnapped. So yes, there would have been coverage at that time.
So you said 11th Avenue, Macleod Trail.
South.
South, yes. So
yes.
At a restaurant.
Yes. She was in there doing food prep early in the morning, getting ready for the day.
Can you tell us what the circumstances were that led this fellow's DNA to be put into the DNA bank?
It's our cold case investigators. As we go through our files, we try and resubmit the DNA to make sure that we can have the new advances with DNA keep up with our files, and it was our investigators that picked this one up and resubmitted.
So tell us about...
No, sorry, how was his DNA? What were the circumstances that led to his DNA being in the DNA bank? He was charged with a serious crime, obviously? Do you have details on that?
I don't have.
Can you tell me about that?
I don't have the details on how his DNA got on the database, but it would have to be a serious crime, and the investigators that charged him with that crime would do an application to have his DNA put on the databank at that time.
Thank you.
So it would have been something at any time in the last 20 years, or is this something recent?
It would have been something recent that came through the last 5-10 years that would put it on the databank and allowed us to get our hit.
So assuming this gentleman is on his way back to Calgary as we speak?
We're arranging for transportation now, yes.
Okay, do you have any details on the standoff that led to his arrest today?
I have minimal details on the standoff that happened. I did talk to Kingston before I arrived here. They've done a press release probably 15-20 minutes earlier than this one, and they put a lot of details into their press release about exactly what happened during the arrest for the Canada-wide warrant.
Now, was the standoff in Kingston today, was that arresting him on that warrant?
It was our warrant that we asked Kingston to arrest him for that caused the issues out there, yes.
Okay.
Have you had any recent communication with the victim in this case?
We've been talking to the family. They're very emotional and very happy that this is coming to some resolution, yes.
I imagine it must be traumatic to almost relive this 20 years later.
It's the whole family relives this. It's traumatic to everyone that's engaged in it, absolutely.
So the victim at the time was in her 50s?
That's correct.
So she'd be probably in her 70s, but she is
I can't confirm that. I'd have to talk to my investigators.